Hello again. Marjorie Phillips says hello again from Edmonton, Alberta. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, did you stream?
Yes.
Awesome. We are set. So please jump into the chat, say hello. We're just going to give people a few minutes to arrive and settle in before we get going. Please jump into the chat, say hello. We're just going to give people a few minutes to arrive.
Live stream.
There.
That's like the YouTube thing coming
the mute button works.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I need to let everyone know that our Through the Back course is open and begins tomorrow. It's a brand new beta course, so we're creating it as we go, incorporating the feedback of all of our participants every step of the way so that we can make it the very best possible course. Please, if you're curious at all about it, please just click on the link and check it out. And if you have any questions, let us know. You can ask your questions here. You can also email us at ritterdressage@gmail.com. You can also send us private messages. It's absolutely fine. I'm going to need to drop that info in on all the other places. I'm going to be monitoring comments on YouTube and on Facebook, so I'll be doing that through my phone while we're checking the questions here. Feel free to post your questions if you're on Zoom in either the Q&A or the chat. We will check both. Yeah. So today we are here to talk about when the judge comments, horse not through the back. What does this mean? What are they talking about? And what do you do about it? How do you get the horse more through the back?
Yeah, that's always a little complicated when you talk when you want to know what judges mean, because it depends on the individual understanding of that judge. Because it could be something, it could mean something different for different judges. Right?
Unfortunately,
it's not objective in that sense.
It could be, but it's not.
Yeah, 15, 20 years ago, that would have meant the horse has to put his head down and arch the neck more and probably be behind the vertical. Today, it's probably not so much. Not so much behind the vertical. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They still do want the head, the neck arch. They want stability. They want to see the nose on the vertical or slightly in front.
It's the same with the half passes. When the judge says needs more bend, then I always wonder what do they mean? Do they mean just more neck bend, or do they mean bend through the whole body? So if you're competing and you get these comments, it would probably be good if you could talk to the judge and ask them what they mean exactly, just to verify that you're on the same page and you have the same definition for the same technical terms. Right? So it's makes it more complicated in a way, because you have to figure out what does the judge know and what do they mean with what they're saying. If you don't compete, then of course it doesn't matter. You can ignore what other people are saying. But usually through the back implies, or more, it needs to be more through the back, usually implies that the horse needs to be rounder somehow, right? And so in the context of roundness, there is a nice French term bascule, which refers to roundness of the horse. And then you can apply that to different parts of the body, right? There is the bascule of the neck. So if the neck is nice and arched, you can call that bascule. But then there's also a bascule of the back. Often the jumpers talk about the bascule over the jump. If a horse has good form in jumping, then the entire spine forms like a curve, that's concave on the top and convex on, the other way around, convex on the top, concave on the bottom. So they arch the back and stretch the top line over the jump. And you could also talk about a bascule of the croup in a sense. And I think I vaguely remember that Charles de Canfy talked about these things like 25 years ago when we rode in clinics with him. He talked about the bascule of the neck and the back and the croup, and I thought that was a good distinction to make, or a good thing to talk about, in a way. And maybe you've seen horses that had a round neck, maybe with some elevation, but then behind, if this is the neck, maybe then the back look kind of straight and horizontal. So it's like, this doesn't match, the back doesn't really match the neck, so that roundness of the neck doesn't continue in the back. That's often in horses where the rider sits pretty heavily on the seat bones and then holds the horse, and then they may arch the neck, and it may be very round, and the nose may be vertical, but you get the sense that there's a lot of tension on the reins, and the hind legs are probably not flexing very much, but they may be pushing a lot, and so it doesn't look harmonious anymore, right? So in a sense, when a horse is through the back, everything should look round and feel round. And you've probably seen horses where the croup looked kind of flat and angular. I mean, of course, some horses are built a little that way, but also if they're not really engaging the hind legs, if they're not really flexing the hind legs, the croup looks kind of funky, straight, and angular rather than round, right? So when the hind legs are doing their job, everything looks a little bit rounder. And of course, you have horses like Lusitanos or PREs where the croup looks like a watermelon, half a watermelon, which is an advantage. And then you have horses that have naturally a bit of a flat croup and so on, that makes it more difficult. But even the ones that don't have especially great conformation can appear rounder when they're ridden well. And even the Lusitanos or the PREs can start to look angular and not so nice, if they're ridden badly. If they push the croup up and the hind legs are out, then even the Lusitano croup starts to look pointy and angular, So, so you can change the look of the horse with the way you ride them. And so we strive for roundness everywhere, right? A round croup, a round back, a round neck, and so on. And that comes from this energy transmission from the hind legs along the spine and so on. And when the horse is balanced and you have this nice energy circuit through the whole body, the back lifts, the withers lift, the rib cage expands, and that creates this roundness of the center of the horse, roundness of the rib cage, the back, and so on. And then this lifting of the withers leads to a stretch of the top line of the neck where the poll kind of goes forward and releases. So even though the horse may be fully elevated, if you do collected frontal canter or piaffe passage, the horse may be very elevated, but there should still be a stretch in the top line. And this feeling that even though it's a forward upward stretch, the poll releases and hangs. Eddie Comfy always talks about how the head should hang like a chandelier. I always like that picture too. So it's like the feeling that the withers come up and the poll goes forward and down a little bit. When the horse is not going through the back, the withers go down and the poll goes up and back. Right? So very, very characteristic. It can be subtle, but it's unmistakable. Once you've seen it, once you've felt it, when the withers start to drop and the poll comes kind of at you, when you're riding, the poll comes up and back towards you, always a bad thing, right? But you want the poll to go forward and away from you, and the withers up, and then the base of the neck gets wide, top line stretches. And even though you feel like everything kind of moves up and forward, like the neck can be like a mountain when you ride an older Baroque stallion who's very advanced in the training, it looks like the neck is like a massive mountain, really. It's impressive, when you have a horse that's 15, 20 years old and it's been trained correctly all his life. It's incredible, how big these necks can be. But there's always this feeling of the poll, the ears, going away from you and down, and this feeling like if I were to allow the horse to take the reins and chew the reins out of my hand, he would stretch forward downward. It's like this feeling like even in the highest collection, there is this suppleness, this lightness, this release that if I allowed the horse to stretch, he would, Whereas if he's not through the back and you release the rein, he may just drop the back more and the head and neck may come up and back at you even more, right? So that's why actually these Übelstreichen things, exercises can be helpful because you're testing. If you completely drop the rein contact on one rein, you will see what happens to the head and neck. Does the horse lose the bend? If you do it on the inside, does the horse suddenly look to the outside? Does the horse invert more, or does the horse actually improve and become rounder and stretch the top line more? So this complete release of the rein is a good test in a way of how balanced the horse was, how well he's on the aids, on the seat, on the leg, on the rein, on the bit, and so on. So that's why in a lot of the competition tests, that's actually a good thing to have that release in there. The Germans do this Überstreichen. The French have that descente de la main, which is not the same, but it's sort of related. It's like releasing both reins. Like descente is really a lowering of the hand. Like when you think of these old Baroque and Renaissance riders with a relatively high hand carriage, horses going with a curb bit and so on. And then if you lower your hand and go maybe a little bit forward, then you release the contact. And then, if the horse is well trained, you can then keep the horse up and collected with your seat. Or with your seat, you could also allow him to stretch. That's the thing, and the horse should not necessarily stretch forward and down just because you release the rein. But this forward downward stretch is something that comes from your seat. And I think either Udo Bürger or Alfred Knopfler talks about that the horse should not simply stretch because I give the rein. He should only stretch when I allow him from my seat, right? So something, a little detail to keep in the back of your mind too. But yeah, anyway, so this release and letting go of the rein is a good test for self-carriage, relaxation, balance, and so on. I do that too. This, when I engage the hind legs, I flex them by sitting on them, and I maybe bring the head and neck, the withers up a little bit, and then I release, and then I want to feel the horse, like lifting the back and the withers, stretching the top line more, lowering the pole a little bit, and then you can play with that, right? Push the hind leg under, sit on the hind leg, bring the front end up, allow the horse to lift the middle, release the pole, stretch the top line, lower the pole a little bit, and then you can go through these elements multiple times, and then the balance or the outline changes a little bit. So you increase the engagement, you increase the flexion of the haunches, you give the horse a little release by allowing him to lower the neck just a little bit and lift the middle up. And when I release with the rein and the horse lowers the pole, I want the middle to come up. I don't want the withers to go down and the head to go even more down. Like an extreme case of that would be the Western pleasure horses, that the extreme version, peanut rollers that are just completely on the forehand. Everything is down. Croup is up, and from the croup everything goes down. That's not what we want, right? We want maybe the engagement and the flexion of the haunches. So there is maybe a little bit of a lowering of the croup, and we want the feeling that the pole releases, so it has this tendency to go forward and down, but we want the middle to come up. And then within those parameters, you can play, lift the withers, the shoulder, the neck, the head up more. But even if you elevate the front end more, you still want to get the feeling that the pole is relaxed, has this relaxed feeling rather than tight and up against you. It still has to be hang. The head has to hang in a way, right? Delicate balance sometimes, right? And the horse moves from that perfect, happy medium to, a little bit too high, a little bit too low, a little bit, this and that. So, and they're always trying to fine tune it, tweak it, and so on. But it's an interesting, it's sort of this quest for roundness and lightness and softness, but also collection and impulsion and this feeling of the front end lifting up and like a wave coming from the hind leg that lifts you up the back, the saddle, the rider, and transports you forward. That's always how I think of up transitions, that there's this wave, like you're sitting in a little boat on the ocean and the wave comes and lifts you and carries you forward.
Fills you, it's like the energy
Right.
comes and it fills your
Yeah.
seat and the legs and the rib cage, and the horse swells as the horse lifts up into the up transition.
Mhm.
Optimally.
Yeah.
Dogs are competing for my attention here. They're gonna start fighting soon.
Yeah.
Jack Russells.
Yeah, anyway, so you can tell that the descriptions get a little flowery and fuzzy because it's very much a feeling that you're trying to achieve. It's nothing hard and fast, it's nothing quantifiable in that sense. X number of degrees and of this and that, but it's this feeling, the energy in the horse, and this feeling of certain parts of the horse lifting and swelling in a way. It's like the middle of the horse you want to lift and become wider and to expand, and then you want.
Swell is a good word because it evokes the image of the swell of a wave. As the wave is building, it swells.
Exactly.
And the energy of the horse operates very much the same way.
Yeah, it's true, and you really get the feeling of a big wave or a swell of a wave, where the horse lifts you with his back, but he gets wider as he gets taller in the middle, kind of thing. Steinbrecht actually also talks about how when you shorten a body, it has to become wider because the mass, the volume stays the same. So, and so if you think of a sausage, if you make a sausage shorter, it becomes wider, right? So, and that's kind of the picture that he has in his mind, probably, right? So if you make the horse's body shorter by bringing the hind legs closer to the front legs, you collect the horse, the middle has to get wider.
It's true.
And you feel that actually.
Yeah.
And when the horse gets narrow in the middle, it's always a bad sign. Then the back is sagging and the hind legs are not really supporting enough. They're not doing their job. So yeah, look for the swell, back withers, lifting, rib cage, expanding. So you feel like the horse is filling your seat and your leg. You feel like the horse is seeking contact with your legs. He's seeking contact with your seat. It's something that's often puzzled me that, we always talk about how the horse has to seek contact with the hand and this and that, and then you have to release and make room and
which is valid.
But nobody talks about the equivalent of the seat and the leg. Nobody talks about how the horse's back needs to seek contact with your seat, and how the seat needs to make room for the horse's back to come up and fill the space, just like your hand has to release and allow the horse to fill that space.
This is very much has to do with throughness.
Yeah. Exactly.
Also, people always talk about the acceptance of the bit, the acceptance of the reins, the acceptance of the rider's hands, but the horse has to also accept the legs, and that doesn't just mean tolerate the feeling of the rider's legs, the horse's legs. It actually also means that the horse is receptive to them, but even one step beyond that it completely doesn't brace against the rider's leg, that it invites the touch of the rider's leg.
At first they have to tolerate and accept your leg being there, but then you want to go one step further. You want the horse to seek the contact. Like if you take your legs a little bit away, you want the horse to say, hey, where did you go? Where did you go? And then they try to fill the space to stay in touch. And the same with the back. If you swing up with your pelvis and you create a little vacuum under your seat, you want the horse's back to say, hey, where did you go? And follow you up and fill that void.
And they're related. The contact that the horse has to make with your leg is related to the contact you want the horse to make with your seat as well. And it's not just that the horse seeks it out, but there's a level of trust there too. Just like we want the horse to trust our hands, that our hands are not going to jerk them on the mouth. The horse, in order to make a really good quality contact, the horse has to trust that they're putting a sensitive part of their body into your hands, literally, but also with the back and the sides of the rib cage too. These are actually sensitive parts of the horse. Sort of like, if I touch him gently like that, he knows I always touch him gently. I don't sometimes beat him. The vacation. Like word better. When you touch somebody, you're like, if I touch my daughter, okay, she doesn't flinch. You know, because she trusts my touch. And the same thing, the horse has to trust your touch. That means that there's no bracing. Like we've all ridden a horse that when you apply the leg, there's this hardness. The horse hardens the rib cage against you. It's because there's a lack of trust there. For some reason, something has happened along the way to break that trust, and you have to earn that trust back. The horse has to trust that your leg aids are going to speak clearly. And in order to do that, you have to be very careful and precise with your aids. And then when the horse can feel the legs and will trust the legs, then the horse will lift the back and trust.
Yeah, that's the thing. When, the things I'm describing, this lifting of the back and the, seeking contact with the seat and expanding the rib cage. It's like Shana says, the horse has to trust you, because when they do that, they open themselves up and they become vulnerable.
Yeah.
Just like they have to trust the hand in order to seek the contact and the conversation with the hand. So they have to trust your hand, and everybody's familiar with these hand and rein and these things. Like everybody has heard it a million times.
Reins, like you have two baby birds, all of these things, and it's all well and right.
Yeah.
But
for some reason, nobody talks about the seat and the leg, but it's the same. It's the exact same. The horse has to trust your seat as much as he trusts your hand. He has to trust your leg as much as he trusts your hand. He has to open up and make himself vulnerable. Because, of course, if he opens up and he's all soft and nice and you slam down on his back, that hurts, right? So then next time he's not going to do that.
Immediately he says, never again, never trust you.
Yeah, or if you grip with your legs or you kick with your spurs every stride, then the horse is going to
or just nagging with the leg.
The horse will and the horse will harden himself and he will shrink. He will make himself very narrow and try to get away from your leg. It's like, I want nothing to do with this leg. And then suddenly you have no place to sit, right? For the leg and the seat. So that's super important. And I feel that, like in traditional riding instruction, that's never talked about. At least I've never heard it. Maybe there are some trainers who do, and that would be good. I think it should be talked about a lot more.
But we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, when you ride, experiment with that. Like, ride with your normal leg position, and then something I used to do, because I was not aware how much I was gripping sometimes when I was younger. My teachers had pretty strong leg contact, and I had I was gripping, and then I realized I have no idea how much pressure I'm applying. So then I would take my legs off a little bit, breathe with my leg, relax the leg. And then, of course, you're trying to do something, you're riding a movement, and then before you know it, the leg puts more pressure on and more pressure and more pressure, and you don't realize it. So then I've made it a habit always to take my leg off again and double check, how much of this is my leg hanging, gravity, and so on, and how much of this is muscle effort. Because ideally your leg should just sort of hang there. You shouldn't press, right?
Objectively, we ride with the softest possible contact with the legs, with the seat, and with the reins.
That equitation and bedroom slippers that Bushy and Oliveira always talk about, right? So just let your leg hang, keep it soft, keep it draped. And then, you need to give an aid sometimes, of course. And then that leg aid is a little muscle contraction. It's an impulse, but there needs to be a release.
Exactly. It's there and then it goes away. It goes back to neutral, hanging, gentle. And it's a gentle embrace. It's super light and soft.
So just like after the half halt, you have to release. Everybody's familiar with the concept. Right. But when you give a leg aid, you also have to release. So it could even be good to relax your leg first, give a little impulse quick as a driving aid, and relax, or take the leg off a little bit and then relax it down again. That can help you overcome a habit of gripping, squeezing, and so on, which I used to do that. And I think a lot of other people do, especially probably from the German school. They tend to drive and squeeze more and more inside leg, right? More inside leg, more outside rein. And then you
more is better, right?
You increase the muscle contraction and the pressure, and then of course you lock up in your hips, and then the horse locks up, and then that becomes a downward spiral.
Yeah,
So,
yes.
so that's why, I mean, at some point I realized I was making all these mistakes, and I had to fix them and untrain them. So I did this relax, aid, relax again. So really focus on the release before the aid, release after the aid. So it's a little bit like, you know, when you're typing a text, you have words, right? And the words are separated by blank spaces. And our aid should be like that. Our aid is like a word. And then but how is the horse supposed to know what's an aid and what's just gripping, squeezing, bumping, whatever, pulling? So you have to have something that isolates the aids, right? So release, aid, release, passive, active, passive, you know, or an active release, you know, and then an active aid and an active release, if you want to make it really clear. And if you think about these things and you become aware of how you're doing these things, I mean, these are so basic that we do these every day and we do them automatically when we don't think about them. And there's a danger in that too. If you never think about what you're doing, how you're doing it, then you could be cultivating a lot of bad habits, basically, right? And maybe, you know, the horse doesn't perform at his best because of those bad habits, like the things you do in the basics without thinking. So I always found that I made the most progress by trying to think about, well, how am I doing this actually? What am I doing? You know, as opposed to what do I think I'm doing? What am I actually doing? And then paying attention to the little details and then changing those. And so I worked very hard on relaxing and then giving an aid, relaxing again, yielding with my leg. Like the concept of überstreichen with the rein, you can apply to the leg. Take your leg off, relax your leg and let it hang. Or with your seat, you can apply it to the seat. You sit there, you follow along, you know, you're sitting the movement, and then swing up a couple of strides, create a little vacuum under your seat. Like you could think, I want to move my seat bones off the saddle, but I want the fabric of my breeches to stay in touch, right? That's small. So somebody who watches you doesn't see that you're emphasizing the up movement, but what they may see is that, oh, the horse is lifting his back more and he's stretching the top line more, right? So it can be very small, like lift this much with your seat bones. Shouldn't be visible from the outside, but the horse will feel, oh, there is a little bit more air, there's a little bit of space. And if the horse has enough energy, he'll fill the space, he'll come up with his back and fill it. If he doesn't have enough energy, you may have to activate a little bit, maybe touch with a leg, touch with a whip or so that he knows more effort. And then when the hind legs move more forward and you know, under, they will lift the back a little bit too. And because the hind legs and the back are connected, more engagement of the hind legs means, you know, the belly muscles contract more, and that means the back lifts more. And we have to allow that. You know, if we sit like a brick, very heavy, you know, on the horse's back, then we can drive, and then the horse attempts to lift the back, but then there is this lower ceiling. The back bumps against the low ceiling, so it drops again, and the hind leg goes back out again. Right? So riders often sabotage their own efforts that way. Like all your driving aids may not be able to go through because your weight is preventing the horse from lifting his back and prevents the hind legs from engaging more. So then play a little bit with driving with your leg and swinging up in your pelvis. Make like überstreichen with your seat, right? Instead of the rein. Create space, create a vacuum under your seat and see if the horse will fill it. Mm-hmm. And that can become a game. Like, how high can I swing before my seat actually loses touch with the saddle or with the horse's back? And then if you feel like, okay, now I'm losing touch with the saddle, maybe drive a little bit and see if the horse will lift his back more so he stays in touch. You can do this in the trot and the canter especially, and it's fascinating because often once the horses understand that game that you're playing with them, they will lift their back more and more until you feel like, I can't get away from the horse's back. Like no matter how high I lift my pelvis, the horse will always lift his back to stay there and keep the contact. It's a really interesting. That's something I really understood when we had a thoroughbred gelding that was Miles. It was off the racetrack. Really nice horse, had really good conformation. He was with the racehorse for a long time. Then he was an eventer, and wasn't using his back so well. But then in the canter, I started to play with that idea, and I would stirrup step inside front, outside hind to create more of a rocking motion. He didn't have enough of the up and down component. There was too much of the forward backward motion in the canter. So the canter was kind of flat. It was a little scratchy. It was not really up. And then I tried that step inside front, step outside hind, and then lift my seat as the withers came up. And the more I did this, the more he started to rock up and down. And I really had that feeling. It's like, I can't get away from him.
Almost like he was sucking the horse up into his seat. And
It was
the horse just got rounder, bigger in the canter. I remember watching it.
It was a big light bulb moment. I was really changing the way he was cantering. He had a good canter to begin with. It was just buried, in a way, because racetrack and
ridden by inventors, it happens. I mean,
So-
not that inventors are bad. Don't get me wrong, but beginner inventors, they don't know a whole lot. They just they go. They just go.
Yeah. But so it was amazing how much that canter transformed and how much this sort of canter went into rubber ball, beach ball bounce. Yeah.
Bounce.
That was mind blowing for me back then. It was a long
beautiful.
time ago, but I still remember that very clearly. It's
I
like,
do too, because it was really memorable. It was like, wow, how much you can change the horse just with your seat names.
Yeah.
And I mean, exercises are brilliant. Don't get me wrong. We use them a lot. And that's a cornerstone of our training. We use exercises to help train the horse. The aids, also the combinations of the seat can do so much to shape the horse, the back movement.
Yeah.
And this can be done in the trot too.
Yeah, exactly. It was just I made room for his back and explored that. This how much will he fill the space that I create, and how much space do I need to create so that he can move, optimally. And it was surprising. It was really surprising, and really changed the way he cantered. So that's still burned into my memory in a way. So everybody can do that with their horse. You can just sit always sit, follow along, try to feel the movement. There's always an up and down component. There's a left and right. There's a forward and back. In the trot, it's more up and down than left and right. Not much forward back. In the walk, you have more forward back. In the canter, you have forward and back and up and down. But then you can focus on one of these dimensions and then try to make it bigger. Maybe make the up movement bigger, or make the downward movement bigger, make the left-right movement bigger, make the forward-backward movement bigger in your seat, and just see what happens. How does the horse change the way he's walking or trotting or cantering when you do that? And you can really shape the gait by doing that. You can diminish counterproductive movements. You can enhance movements that are good but too small. Sometimes it's like the horse needs to go uphill more, so there needs to be more of an upward movement, whether it's walk or trot or canter, right? And then part of that is making room for the horse's back and withers to come up. And part of it is sometimes a little bit more energy. They have to sometimes push a little bit more so that the energy of the hind legs, or the pushing power of the hind legs, lifts you up and lifts the forehand up.
Yeah.
So you create movement, then shape the movement. It's actually something that one of my oldest teachers told me in the 80s. First you have to create movement, then you have to shape it. And that's a little bit that, with your seat, you make room, you close certain doors, you open other doors, and then you may have to ask for more movement so that the movement actually is big enough to fill the open spaces. So there is enough pressure in your water hose to reach, the spaces you want to water. So. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Did we get slightly off track though?
Probably.
I mean, I love where the discussion went. I love it when it goes organically in its own direction. But maybe we wrap up the part about the judges' comments. There's no questions here right now.
Yeah, I know, but
And there are on
yeah.
Facebook and YouTube.
but yeah, but this is all, you know, tied to what does it mean when the judge says more through, the horse needs to be more through.
Yes.
And what we were just talking about is all more through, you know, and rounder, but round where it's not just roundness of the neck, there's a roundness of the back, a roundness of the rib cage, a roundness of the croup.
Often on dressage tests, when the judge, you know, you'll get a horse needs to be more through, but they don't give any more details than that. And you're like, well, I don't know what you mean. You know, there's no more information given because they can't in the context of a dressage test when they, you know, have to, you know, I know because I used to judge too, you have to go really quick through, you know, giving comments to your scribe and the scribe has to scribble them down really fast. But still, interpreting this horse needs to be more through. What the actual F, you know, what do you mean? What do you mean? You know?
Yeah, I mean, if you can talk to judges,
sometimes
it would be good to ask questions, clarify. You can even, I mean, you can participate in some of those judges' continuing education, you know, courses or something, or take lessons with a judge. If you're interested in competing, there is a certain value in taking lessons with judges. They usually focus very much on what they want to see in competition. They're not so much useful in teaching you how to train your horse, but they will give you a better understanding of what the judges want to see in the show ring.
Crafting for the competition arena, which is something. There is something to that. It's not the basics of the training, you know, it's not biomechanics based. We're not working with the psychology of the horse and trying to get them to, you know, understand the training. That's not what usually some judges, there's always going to be an exception to the rule, but many of them, they're just going to focus on to optimize your score for the shouldering. You need to write it like this and so on.
A lot of judges, when they teach, they will actually say, well, this would be a 5 or this would be a 7, and maybe they will even say why or what needs to happen to make it into an 8 or a 9.
Seen this.
So I wouldn't choose a judge as my main teacher, but if you're seriously interested in competing, there is some value in taking lessons from judges too. And
so you know how to craft that.
One of our old students and friends is actively competing in Canada and the US, and she says that like sometimes she does clinics, writing clinics with O judges or I judges, and she always likes what they have to say. She says they're very knowledgeable, they're very educated, and they're helpful. Whereas like the lower level judges, they often don't understand the subject so well. Sometimes they have an axe to grind, and then that's often not so helpful. So it's just her personal experience. So if you know, if you're interested in that sort of thing, then you know, contacting, you know, an I or O judge, or you know, maybe taking some lessons, or might be useful to do. If you're not interested in judging, then never mind it.
Then forget it.
Yeah,
you know,
it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant then.
Not helpful.
But you know, some of you are interested in judging, and there's nothing wrong with, in competing. There's nothing wrong with competing, and it's good to understand the rules of the game.
You can use it to actually even make your training better. I always did. My horses always came home from a show
definitely
better trained because of the show. I used the experience of the show to improve my horses.
Yeah, mine too. I found that too. I mean, I was never a big fan of showing. I kind of put myself through it.
I can't see
because I thought that there is something useful to learn, and I always thought maybe it gives us more credibility or whatever. Because there was this perception that classical riders don't know how to ride, they can't ride their horse on the bit, and you know, that sort of thing. So for a while I thought I should probably show and just show that I can do it.
Very begrudgingly did it.
But I never enjoyed it. It was never my thing. You know, it's
I liked it. It was fun. I like challenges.
Yeah. But I have to say, I learned useful things, and the horses always seem to come back from competitions more mature. Like if we took younger horses, they were more settled and more mature coming back. And overall, throughness and permeability and balance and straightness had improved because the competitions make you look at things that you would maybe rather ignore at home because
Or you would-
don't enjoy them, or you
Or
wouldn't
you
focus
would
on
just
them.
ignore because it's okay if the horse does the transition, 3 strides after C. It's okay in training at home, but you're forced to get precise, which means you're forced to bring your horse on the aids or to ensure that your horse is always on the aids and that it's not negotiable, that there's no wiggle room, that the horse is always with you. And there's an advantage to this.
Exactly.
You can use it to make your training better.
Yeah, competitions make you do things that you don't enjoy so much that you would otherwise.
It showed me what I needed. I love polishing. I polish things. I polish all the work.
Right.
And it showed me what I needed to polish more.
Mhm.
We have questions. that
Yeah,
were
we can
on here
start looking
So,
at, yeah.
I had a couple comments and questions. So Francis Seisel says this is a lovely vision and description of how to see this forward and up. I've often used the release of the inside rein to test.
Mhm.
And sometimes trainers say, don't give the inside rein too many times, which irritates me because I like to test it too.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. I don't think there are negative side effects from releasing the rein and doing Überstreichen.
Maybe it just irritated them. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen it used too much.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. It's a useful thing. It's really a test, for self carriage, bend, and so on.
Mhm.
If you release the inside rein, you can see if the bend was correct or if you're just pulling on the inside rein to get the head to the inside. Yeah.
So Melvin Equus asks, how do you release from the seat? So because we were talking about how every aid has to have a release. It's not that you release the horse from the seat, it's that your seat aids have a release. For example, your weight aid, the weight doesn't crush down and stay there, hammering into the horse.
Yeah.
You give a weight aid that releases, that bounces, that presses through your weight, the hind leg into the ground or front leg, but usually it's hind leg into the ground and releases because that foot doesn't stay on the ground. It steps down, pushes and picks up again. And so you step down during the carrying phase and then you release. And it creates this buoyancy in the horse too. The joints start to flex more when you use your weight aids in this way. You don't use it every stride. You use it strategically when you need to add a little bit more.
Yeah, if you think of the trot, the horse pushes himself up into the suspension phase, you feel the upward motion. Then the horse lands, it's a downward motion, right? Then one diagonal pair of legs lands. And as the horse lands, you could press that hind leg into the ground by emphasizing the downward motion with your whole seat. It's like the horse has landed, but you could continue the downward motion for a split second longer, which would then flex that hind leg, and so that creates a half hold, and you can augment that with a rein pressure, with a stirrup pressure, and all kinds of options, right? The rein adds the weight of the horse's head and neck, right? The stirrup pinpoints the movement of your weight down through that leg that's on the ground on that side. So there is this neutral bouncing along with the horse or swinging along with the horse, and then you emphasize the downward motion. It's like dribbling a ball, press it into the ground, and the pressing the ball into the ground creates the rebound motion. The ball wants to bounce back up, and you could enhance this rebound motion by making more room with your seat. So you could momentarily support yourself more with the inside of your knee, let your pelvis swing higher. Like instead of just being passive and letting the horse lift you up, you could meet the horse halfway and use the movement of the wave of the back of the horse and swing up a little more so that your seat momentarily loses a little bit contact with the saddle, and see if the horse will lift higher. That would be like the release of the seat. You have the horse still on the seat, right? He never comes off the seat, but you create more space under your seat so the horse's back can rise more. Just like, when you release the rein, the horse could fill that space by stretching the neck a little bit more, maybe, so release in that kind of sense. And And it's really interesting to play with that. You can go neutral, be passive, just follow along. And then what if you emphasize the downward motion 1 or 2 strides? Press the hind leg into the ground. And then what if you emphasize the upward motion? Sometimes that reminds me of a doctor, who has to revive a patient who flatlined, right? When the heart stops beating, you have this flat line. And then doctors try to resuscitate the patient by pressing on the heart, on the chest, and then letting go. And if you do it just right, the heart starts beating again. And you can do the same if you have a back that's flatlined, that's dead. Because there are backs that are dead, they don't move, they're rigid. And then you can resuscitate them just like a heart patient,
You invite the
press the hind leg down to
Not
create.
hard.
Yeah, it's just like the doctor
That sounds
compress
hard.
the chest, right?
It's
But then you lift up.
you
make
invite
room.
this movement.
Yeah,
You initiate.
you send an impulse through the hind leg into the ground just to create a little bit of a flexion of the hind leg. And then what you're really interested in is the flexion and extension. And then you invite the extension and then maybe be neutral for a couple of strides and then press down a couple of strides and swing up a couple of strides so that out of this flat line, you create a little bit of motion, then you create a little bit of more motion. And then eventually it swings. The back starts swinging because the hind legs start swinging forward and back, and they swing forward, they touch down, they flex, they push, and the back gets lifted up, by that. So with your seat and your aids, you can resuscitate the dead back, by sending an energy impulse down through the hind leg into the ground, but then making space for the back to lift up. That's kind of what I mean when I talk about the release of the seat. Yeah. Create space. You have to find out, how much space does my horse's back need to lift so he can move optimally? It's like, how much would he move his back if I weren't there? That was, for me, that was sort of a train of thought that was really important, like 25 years ago or so, where I thought, well, one of our goals is to make the horse or allow the horse to move as well with us on board as they move in the pasture, right? You see horses that can move beautifully in the pasture. As soon as the rider gets on, it's all gone. All the beautiful gaits disappear, right? Like, why is that? So I thought, well, I want my horse to move as well with me as he moves without me. So that means his back has to be able to move as freely up and down. The hind legs have to move.
As if there was no weight.
Exactly. And the hind legs have to move as easily, freely forward and back as if I wasn't there. So how can I find out how much the horse's back moves? Because if I just sit there, even if I'm soft and I'm relaxed and everything, there's gravity, right? And gravity will act as a brake on the horse's movement. So it's not good enough to just sit there and be passive, because then the horse has to lift me up and he has to overcome gravity and mass inertia to be able to move his back. So what if I meet him halfway? I take the impulse of his hind legs and his back coming up, but then I take some responsibility for my own weight and I move my pelvis up to make a little room and invite the horse's back. How much will he follow me? How far will he lift his back if I stay out of the way? Right? And so it becomes this little dance and this little conversations, like between being passive, following along, pressing down, swinging up, making room. And you'll see, things start to change. The horse will start to take an interest. It's like, hey, there's something going on out there, and then you can influence the movement of the horse's back. You can change it, you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, you can move it in a different direction, more to the left, more to the right, more up, more down, more forward, whatever. It's interesting. So you can mold the movement, you can mold the horse's body with your seat. It's all, basically about where you create open spaces for the horse to fill, and where you create an impulse to push the horse in a certain direction for a split second, and where you frame and you're closing a door. So like, no, you can't exit through this door. You have to go this way, you know, kind of bounce off that door and keep going straight. You know, so there's all these options you have. It's a little bit like playing with water, channeling water, creating openings, closing doors, you know, and then the water will find a way. You know, the water will, you know, if there's a door that's closed, the water will find another way. And if you create an opening, the water will go there, you know. So, and the horses are very much like that too.
Do you want the next question?
Sure.
Luigi Cariati asks, how do you use the rein to lift the head up?
I don't really want to use, I don't want to lift the head up so much. I want to lift the withers, and then of course, you know, when you lift the withers, the neck and the head will usually come up as well. And it's a combination of your seat, you know, when you engage your core muscles, you can swing up and forward with your pelvis, lift your belly button, lift your solar plexus, stretch your legs down. That will create a lift of the forehand. Because if you just lift the head, the back and withers may go down, and then
you can have lifting of the head with no change of balance.
Right.
And what we want is to actually change the balance of the horse.
Yeah.
We want to shift the weight into the hindquarters by lifting the withers and vice versa. Lifting the withers and lifting the head. So lifting the head, you can only, with the rein, you can only do in as much as you can bring the withers with you, which takes a horse that already knows how to lift them.
The lifting of, like if you have a horse that's curled up, he's too low, and you feel like he needs to bring his head up, that lift should start with the withers, with the shoulders. The horse should start lifting the withers and the shoulders, and then that kind of translates all the way to the head.
Use the rein to shoulders. Maybe that's a better question, huh?
You can. If you have a good seat, strong seat, if you have a seat that's well connected, where you have the rein, the arms connected to your abdominal muscles and back muscles, you can lift up and lift the shoulder of the horse up on that side. At
the moment that the shoulder on that side is coming up. So it ends up being simultaneously an aid that helps to lift and liberate the shoulder, but also transfers some weight into the hind leg that's on the ground at that moment on that side, which happens to be the hind leg on that side if you're in the trot.
Yeah, so that rein aid that lifts the front end comes from like your lumbar spine area, abs, back muscles, obliques, everything in that area lifts up, and then your arm is just an extension of your lumbar spine, you know, in a sense.
I always like to think of it as 90% seat, 10% rein. So the rein is just there to support the seat and refer the horse back to the seat, but it does nothing more. It's not.
And you have to release too. Like you can lift and you can release. Even with if you raise your hand, you can release it.
Yeah. And you're never holding the horse.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just like you don't want to hold the horse with the reins anywhere. This is undesirable.
Right. Yeah.
It's
kind of an advanced technique.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
You need a pretty good seat
there you go.
to do it. And then it's okay. If somebody, like if a beginner tried to do that, for example, they would get in trouble with it. But if you're
a bigger problem because they don't have the seat yet to support it.
Yeah, but if you're fairly advanced, if you have a good solid seat and a good connection from your pelvis to your rein, then you can play with that, and it's super powerful.
Yeah.
Super effective.
Next question.
Yeah.
Okay, Francis says again, often you see so much leg used, and I find this disturbing and annoying, which I've come across. Some trainers say you need more leg, more. I've looked at videos of my riding to compare, and I don't constantly use my leg nagging. Okay, it's just a comment. Yeah, but yeah,
absolutely.
Yep. And Carol Connor Walsh says, my trainer has told me I should strive to see my horse's bridle headstall for the optimal position, and my hands, elbows should be soft and flexible. My seat legs should ask him to move forward into my soft hands, and once he is into the rein contact, I can lift his head and pull into this ideal, in quotes, carriage. But Timmy tends to hold tension in his rib cage, pulls on the reins, and lowers his head. I'm wondering if his hind end doesn't have the strength to flex and carry more. I should not worry about his head carriage until he can maintain a softer rounder, not stiff trot. When do you start lifting the head and neck on a horse that tends to pull downward? He's Lippet Morgan, bred to pull things, even though he has a massive hind end.
I mean, you can create this connection, like, yesterday or the day before I was talking about how you build the posture and the contact from the ground up, like from the feet to the spine, by choosing the arena pattern, putting the feet on the arena pattern, and you build it from back to front. So from the feet to the spine and from the hind end to the skull, right? Once you have that connection, you feel like there's a bit of a lift of the back and a bit of a stretch of the top line. Then, some horses then discover that they can get really comfortable. They're pushing the croup up and leaning on the bit. And then you might want to sit more on the hind end and lift the front end up and so on. And then you can play teeter-totter a little bit, like, engage, lower behind, lift in front, allow the horse a little break, allowing the neck to come a little down, the middle of the back to come up again, and then it goes back and forth a little bit like that. You don't want the horse to lean on you, horses try to find the easiest way to accommodate the rider's demands or the rider's wishes, and then if they feel like, oh, I can, relax here and hang out and be lazy, then they'll do that, right? And then sometimes you have to, then say, no, carry yourself. It's not my job to carry your head and neck. You carry it yourself. And so then you play with engagement, flexion of the hind legs, elevation of the front, and then stretch, and so nothing's ever static. Everything is always moving. So balance is a fluid thing in a sense. And you can emphasize engagement, you can emphasize flexion of the hind legs and sitting, you can emphasize pushing, you can emphasize stretching, so you cycle through these things so that you're not drilling one thing and neglecting another, so everything has to, be addressed, and the horse has to kind of practice all of these. And that's one of the difficult things, I guess, as part of the art of riding, that you practice all these skills and you're not focusing exclusively on one and then ignoring all the others.
Yeah. And we have some more on here and some on here. Do you want to enter some of these?
Sure, Carolyn Doris says, I find myself more and more on a bareback pad. Is there a way to translate stirrup stepping without stirrup?
In fact, there is.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing, but if you ride without stirrups and you pretend you're stirrup stepping, it actually works. I'm not sure how. It must change something in the way we sit and the way we use our body, but the horses respond to stirrup stepping even if you don't have stirrups. I found that out by accident.
Yeah.
When I had to ride a student's horse with the stirrups that were too short for me, and
So
there was I crossed them over, because it was felt like a jockey on that horse. And then there was a moment where it was a little bit of a tricky horse, and there was a moment when I felt like, oh, I really would need some stirrup stepping, and had no stirrups, and it's like, oh, what the hell, I have nothing to lose basically, so I'll try it. And lo and behold, the horse reacted. It's like, well, I guess you don't need stirrups for stirrup stepping. It's still a bit of a mystery to me, but it works. So try it out.
It's magic.
Play with it. It actually
it's
works.
just magic. That's all. Black magic.
Voodoo.
Voodoo. Voodoo usually is meant to cause harm, I think.
White voodoo. White magic.
White voodoo.
White magic. Not black magic.
Okay, so Marjorie Phillips says, you're the first person I've ever heard mention Charles de Cunfee. From his books, I've always been surprised he's not better known in North America. Well, he used to be.
It's interesting that you say that. In the 1990s and the early 2000s, he was the big star on the clinic circuit. He was a celebrity, basically.
Yeah.
And but he was born in 1935, which means he's 88 years now. I don't know how much he still travels.
You know, I've
So-
seen videos of him teaching recently, and he looks like he did 25 years ago.
I know, it's amazing.
One
But
of
I'm
them is secret.
I'm sure he slowed down some. That's
I'm sure.
probably one. And yeah, his books came out in the 1990s. He was one of the most prominent authors. Like
And they're really good.
yeah,
read
several
them?
books out there,
Read them.
like the athletic development of the horse and,
Yes.
and a couple of other things. And
Yeah.
the good books. And in the US, he for a long time he was like the only known classical trainer.
Yeah.
And author, and so he
So
was
that's why we rode with him.
really prominent at the time.
Yeah.
Like I said, he was really a celebrity. But now there are a lot more younger people coming up, and a lot of people writing books and doing clinics and online courses and
All
so on.
these young whippersnappers.
So yeah, I'm sure he's slowed down. I mean, he's 88. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't expect him to keep going like a 35-year-old, right?
Mm.
So that's why probably people are not as much aware of them as they were 20, 30 years ago.
And
And
those.
back then there was no competition really. I mean, he was the only one out there, like in the 1990s, there was nobody there in the US.
In the US, there were people that came from Europe and clinic, but. within
Here
the
and
US
there, but they were few and far between. I mean, Autocotas came
Yeah,
here and there, to the
Kamakoka.
US. Yeah, Kamakoka
You know.
lived there. He wasn't as well known as he should have been.
not as well known as DeConfey, for sure.
Yeah, but yeah, and now of course the scene has become more
It's-
competitive. There are a lot more people teaching, training,
Just not
clinicking.
so much bigger than it was.
There's a lot more literature out there. I mean, when I started writing in the 1970s, there was the Müsellos book in Germany. Then if you were lucky, you got Steinbrecht's book and
Yeah.
Soinig and Podhaisky, and that was it. It's like there were 4 books on dressage and a couple of books that were geared strictly at beginners that were basically useless, for more advanced writing, and that was it. And now you have like 1,000 books or more, and it's a whole different scene, a whole different market. And, but yeah, I mean, Charles DeConfey is interesting. He's knowledgeable, and the books are worth reading.
They
and,
are worth reading.
I don't know how active he is in teaching, but
He does some online teaching.
yeah,
I don't know how much in person. I think he's still done some clinics.
yeah.
I think so. We used to even host clinics for him.
Mm. Oh, that
Long
was a
time ago. Long time ago.
30 years
The
ago.
instructor training.
Mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, next thing. Okay, Sally Batty says, I hadn't heard of lifting your seat until I started your courses. But with my youngster, who I have only recently started cantering in the school, it has really helped with the quality of the canter I'm now getting. If I just sit heavy on my seat bones, then he either goes very flat or just stops cantering altogether.
Yeah, makes sense.
He's very clear. His feedback is very clear.
Logical. I mean,
Yeah.
it's if you think about it, it's silly in a way. Like everybody talks about how the horse has to lift his back. How is he supposed to lift his back if you sit
You're
really heavily on his
It's
feet
blocking, yeah.
and you're exerting a downward pressure all the time, right?
Mhm.
So
The
there's
horse will shrink away
Yeah.
from your seat.
there's a
Yeah.
contradiction that teachers telling students you need to sit on your seat bones and sit heavily.
Mhm.
How is he supposed to lift his back if you press it down all the
Yeah.
time, right? So
Yeah.
if you want the horse to lift his back, you have to allow it. Like there's always this
Mhm.
2 sides of the same coin. You ask the horse to do something, but you also have to allow it. You cannot ask the horse to lift his back and then prevent it by pressing down all the time, right? So, if you think about it in those terms, it's logical, but it's usually not presented that way, right? And that the teaching often doesn't reflect that logic. So,
In all fairness, some of the teachers don't even realize this themselves.
yeah, but yeah, I mean,
The way it is. Yeah, it's the way it is.
physics, right? It's common sense. And so it's
We're
useful.
here to change that.
It's useful to think about it in those terms. On some level, it's super simple, really.
Yeah.
If you want the horse to lift the back, you have to allow it, duh. Right? So you have to find a way of making room. How do I make room? It's like gravity. If I sit with all my weight on my seat bones, I will always be pressing the horses back into the ground, and that will always drop the withers and lift the head and neck, and the horse will be inverted. The problem I had when I was younger all the time, right? So until I learned to use my seat in a different way, and if you allow the back to lift, the horse will be able to lower the neck and the paw a little bit, right? And it's not like either or, black or white, not either all down, on your seat bones all the time, or up hovering over the horse all the time. It's more like there's a neutral zone where you're neither sitting heavily nor lightening the seat. And from that neutral zone, you can sit down and you can swing up.
Mhm.
And then you have a
Even without
conversation.
your seat bones ever leaving the saddle.
Right.
That's the beauty of it. And Carolyn Dar has a great question that's related to this. If you lift your seat, won't you brace yourself? I'm trying on the couch and I'm bracing a lot. Maybe it's different on a saddle. My mind can't translate at the moment.
Well, how much bounce does your couch have?
It's not just that. I mean, you can think of elongating your spine and then letting it sink, and elongating your spine and letting it sink.
Yeah.
Yes, you use your muscles, but it's for a split moment. And nothing should be held. That's bracing. Then you'll brace. If you're gonna pull yourself up, you start bracing up. But this is allowing, with the movement of the horse, this elongating and sinking down, elongating and sinking down. The Feldenkrais stuff we do in our courses is really helpful with this, with gaining that body awareness and control.
Yeah, I use the movement of the horse's back. It's to me, it's a little bit like surfing. I mean, I don't surf, but that's what I imagine surfing is like. But there's a wave, and you use the upward energy of the wave, and instead of just passively letting the wave lift you up, you take that energy and you go a little bit higher, and then you see if the wave will come up more, and then you go back down with the wave.
There's also, because you have the hip, you're sitting on your hip joint can open and close with each stride, as it does when you're sitting at the trot, right? Or sitting the canter. The hip joint opens and closes a little bit.
Right, absolutely.
Each stride, there's a change in that, it's horrible. You just increase this a little bit more. You increase the opening and that allow the sink down and increase the opening. So you let the legs support the upper body without actually leaving the saddle. You can go as far as leaving the saddle. That becomes a light seat, or a forward seat, or whatever, standing in the saddle like that. You can take it to the extreme to explore it. I invite you to explore it. Just listen to your horse. If your horse says, I don't like that, back off.
Yeah. So I the more you can utilize the movement of the horse and that momentum and the energy, the up and down energy and movement, the less you have to use your own muscles. You just feed off of the natural movement of the horse, and then you just amplify certain things, and it's really effortless actually. Whereas, like, if you're surfing your couch, it's like a horse with a dead back. There's no movement, right? You cannot swing or bounce on a dead horse or on a dead couch, right? So, and then when you, I mean, there are horses like that are just like your couch, right? And then it's very difficult. And then I create the movement by sending an impulse down through the hind legs into the ground, like this doctor who resuscitates the dead patient, right? With a heart stopped. And then with a little luck, eventually the horse's back starts moving and the heart starts beating. Of course, with your whole couch, it's not going to happen, right?
You have an exercise ball.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. You can
That's true,
straddle it. If you have a nice big one, straddle it. I have a couple sitting around here somewhere. My kids play with them. You can straddle it and sit like you would on a horse, but you can then feel that bounce, because it'll bounce a little bit, and you can sink down and let it come up, sink down and let it come up, and you can feel how you end up opening and closing your hip joints, and your spine can get longer and can sink back to its normal, and longer and sink back to its normal. Play with it. Just play with it. Nothing should be static, though. Nothing should be braced.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Sandra says here, I can't get my horse to lift its back by lifting my seat unless it's already round with good contact. It seems to act as an extra lifting of the withers. but doesn't seem to create it on days when I'm struggling to get him through. Is this your experience? Yeah, if the horse is flat, then swinging up is not going to do anything.
Yeah.
You have to
nothing
start
to work
by
with.
connecting the horse's feet to the ground and the weight. So you basically start with a downward impulse. Maybe you even have to engage the hind
I was
leg
going to
first.
say you actually start
Little
with engaging the hind legs.
Sidestepping kind of, could be enlarging the
Engaging the
circle.
hind legs, creating some
Could be
energy.
Could be shoulder four, could be counter shoulder four, it could be leg yield, anything just that brings one hind leg under the body. And once the hind legs have arrived underneath, then you can start with these, like I said, like the doctor, who tries to resuscitate the patient. They start with pressing down and then releasing. They don't put their hand on the chest and then move up. That's not going to do anything, right? So you have to create this impulse.
And you can do this with your
first.
seat, you can do this with the stirrup, and you can do this with the rein aid. You
Right.
can do any combination of these.
Yeah.
All three are very powerful together. You may only need one or two. You have to see every horse has their own book essentially of how they want to be ridden. You have to find how your horse needs to be ridden. But then you can use these to start to press the hind legs a little bit. At the moment that they touch down, that's when the joints can flex and bend. And so you want to encourage that flexion by pressing the horse at that moment, that hind leg into the ground just a little bit. And it increases the flexion, and then you allow the bounce up, and you can create this and build upon it then, and build upon it, and build upon it like a bouncing ball that bounces higher and higher and higher.
Yeah,
Keeping the energy and the engagement and all of these things, so you have something to work with.
you could think of a basketball or a soccer ball that's sitting on the ground, not moving.
Yeah.
How do you get this ball to move and bounce? Not by putting your hand on it and lifting, but you have to bounce, press down, create a bounce into the ground, and then there will be this little rebound, and then it'll bounce just a tiny bit, and then you do it again, and then it'll bounce a little higher. If you do it in the right rhythm, the rhythm that the ball needs, kind of thing, then you can, from a dead static ball, you can get to a real bounce and dribble, and then you're off and running, right? And it's a little bit the same with a horse's back. You can take a dead back, and with engaging the hind leg and then sending impulses down through the hind legs into the ground, you create a little bit of this pushback, rebound. And then if you do it in the right rhythm and right time and so on, the amplitude becomes a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger, and then eventually you have a swinging back.
Right, and you're then facilitating the transfer of energy that is in the hind legs, was there before with your flat horse. It just wasn't coming through. You start to then facilitate it to come through, comes through the back, and it comes over into the front end of the horse, and you can then you have the circle of the aids possible to be completed. You can then it arrives in your rein contact, and you can complete it. Okay, Sue, where I get stuck is, how do I flex the hind legs? I use some stirrup stepping, but I don't always get it unless I tickle the underside of the ribs.
Yeah, the two sides of the same coin. I mean, you flex the hind legs with half holds, right? And that could be your body sinking down. It could be stirrup pressure, could be half hold on the rein, or any combination. Your body sinking plus stirrup, your body sinking plus rein plus stirrup, or all three. So you have all these options, right? And you can find out what your horse prefers. But after pressing the horse down into the ground, you may have to release and drive so that you make that bounce back bigger. I mean, it's something I have to do sometimes, like really sit down into the hind leg and then release, and create a little bit more of a small explosion, so to speak.
And the horse doesn't object to it because it's so brief, and it works with the timing of the aids. It's the timing of the footfalls, so it's naturally based. If you were working against the timing of the footfalls, the horse would object to it because it wouldn't make sense to the horse. But it makes sense, so the horse accepts it. It facilitates the natural laws of physics at that moment, and there's a natural rebound.
Carolyn Dara says, I believe horses are magic. Sometimes I don't understand the science behind it. They still just they just do understand things to make the magic real. Yeah, there's magic, and it's
there's more than we are aware of actually at play. I really do believe, I know, I experiment with energy and things like that with the horses. They're incredibly revealing and perceptive, and
Elizabeth says Charles was in the UK earlier this year. Wonderful clinic. How we can see what he does is amazing. Yeah, he's been doing this for a long time, so lots of experience.
Yeah.
Terry Douglas says yes, Carl was around, but yes, not many knew of him. Charles DeCountry was the leading one. I think Terry is actually another Mikoka student who knows him very well. And it's true. I mean, Charles DeCountry had several books out. Mikoka didn't. Mikoka was just doing clinics, and then eventually he put out a newsletter with articles. He had a website. And,
with the articles.
He wrote some incredibly brilliant articles. And, when we were writing with him, I told him he should write a book. And it's like, you could be the next Steinbrecht. And this is like, you have so much to say. And he was like,
he did write a book, but it was it didn't get published, but.
Yeah, and he was saying, well, the good guys at the Spanish writing school, they were against books. And it's like one of the chief writers was saying, no books, no bullshitters. So he had this sort of negative attitude towards books, and he didn't see the value of them really. It's like one horse, one rider, one teacher in the arena, and that's how you do it.
He was a writer, not an academic. That was the thing,
It's unfortunate that he didn't write down everything he knew, because he had such an incredible wealth of knowledge and understanding.
We don't know. I don't
know.
He
had notes and
maybe it'll get published someday.
Yeah,
it'd be nice.
Apparently from the time when he was a young writer in Vienna, he kept a diary and he kept lots and lots of notes in shorthand, which hardly anybody can read anymore today. But that would be interesting to see. It would be interesting to follow his process of discovery. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, his knowledge base was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. Not an easy human, but to get along with sometimes, but he was an absolute genius. Lots of
huge wealth of knowledge and experience.
Incredible. He was incredible.
Carolyn Dar says more research are being done. My couch was very static. Thanks for cleaning up. I can do that without bracing. I mean, it sounds silly, but it's important, right? You have to think of all the factors that are at play. The horse is very dynamic. A couch is not, right? So you cannot replicate what you do on a horse when you're sitting on a couch, right?
And she said, oh, I forgot to open my hip. That's why the Travert today was not on 3 tracks, just starting out. There you go.
Actually, one of the things that at one point became a sort of a light bulb moment for me is like, my knee should kind of stay in the same place on the saddle, and it shouldn't move up and down, right? But the horse's back goes up and down. So if my knee stays in the same place.
What moves?
Yeah. So in order to accommodate the up and down movement, my hip joint has to flex and extend. It has to open and close.
Yeah.
And my ankles probably have to flex and extend and open and close a little bit.
Yeah.
And if your hip is locked, your knees will go.
Everything will bounce.
Yeah, you bounce, and you get sores in your calves and sores on the inside of your knees because your knees keep going up and down. Been there, done that. That's why I know how it works. Right. So
you did it all the hard way first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course, I learned it all the hard way. I made all the mistakes, and I probably invented a few more, and then eventually I figured out how not to make the mistakes anymore, right? To save you time. So that image helped me keep my knee in the lowest possible point. That's why I was thinking it feels like I'm kneeling. I have to stretch, let gravity pull my knee forward and down, and then keep it there. Don't let it come up.
Because you have long legs, it feels like kneeling to you. For me, it doesn't, because I have shorter legs. I'm shorter. It never feels like kneeling. But I always wondered about this kneeling thing. I was like, kneeling, it doesn't feel like kneeling to me. But
our bodies are very different, right? So I'm 6'2", right? And Shana is 5'1", 2.
5'2". We heard it.
Yeah, but that makes a difference, right? And I always rode smallish horses, so managing my weight and the impact of my weight on the horse played a big role. So I know all about how to make myself light and minimize the negative impact of my weight on the horse and that sort of thing. But if you're 5 feet tall and you're riding an 18-hand warm blood, you have to use everything you've got, right? You have to make yourself even heavier than you are, in a sense, so the horse even knows you're there. But yeah, so that's why, we sometimes describe things differently because we need to do things differently.
Which I think is really helpful for all of you.
Yeah.
Because then you either relate to something that he says or something I say. Neither is more correct than the other. It's
No.
just we're coming at it from different vantage points, different bodies, and different experiences. Even though we have been together for many years, we ride different horses, so we have different experiences.
Yeah, another thing, like if trainers who have short legs
Yeah.
will often emphasize the lower leg aids. Tall riders with very long legs, they often emphasize thighs and knees. Like I had a teacher who was taller than me, a couple of inches taller. And he said he used to ride with his knees a lot. And I've heard other trainers who were short who would talk about the calf a lot.
Do I talk about the calf? I don't. I talk about
You
the
don't,
thighs.
but other
I don't ride primarily with my calves.
anomaly. But
I'm not an anomaly. Well, I am.
But yeah, so if you basically the moral of the story, if you ride with somebody and they tell you to do something a certain way and they're very positive about that, look at how they're built, look at how you're built. And it's like they can only tell you what works for them. But if you're built differently, then maybe that doesn't work for you the same way it works for them.
If it doesn't make sense, be open to other things.
Yeah.
The other moral of the story is your sample pool was too small.
Yeah.
Because I'm short and I don't ride primarily with my calves. My calves they hang out.
They hang out.
I ride a lot with the thighs, not clenching, but I ate a lot with the thighs. Anyway,
But yeah, confirmation of the rider plays a role, right? So if a high level trainer tells you need to do it this way and that's the only way,
try it.
Yeah, try it, but look at how they're built and look at how you're built. And if they're super tall and you're a little on the short side or vice versa, this may not translate.
If it's not working for you, then take into account that their experience may be absolutely valid. Just it doesn't work for you because your body is different. Your pelvis might tip differently, be shaped differently. Men and women's pelvises changes a lot of things.
Yeah, always think
Keep
about
that in
it.
mind.
Be open, think about it, try it. And then if it doesn't work, think about, well, why does it work for this person but not for me? What's the difference between them and myself? And then that actually will help you understand things better. Even if what they're telling you doesn't work for you, but if you can figure out why it doesn't work for you, then you can find a way to do something else that works for you. And you understand why this works for this person, but it doesn't work for me. And you understand why something else works for me, which may not work for that person.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Tina, how do you say her last name? Much better.
Hitajärvi. Finnish name. They're always.
Oh, yeah, I know. I don't want to mutilate your name. When asking for more movement, when you lose it in canter with a lame horse, to add to the seat, it is better to use the spur or the whip momentarily to create movement. I train lesson horses, and what is the difference between using the spur or the whip? Why would you ride a lame horse?
I know, yeah. First of all, I wouldn't ride a lame horse.
No.
Right? That doesn't make sense. But basically,
when you lose it in the canter, let's just take out with a lame horse. Let's just take that part
exactly.
out.
The difference between whip and spur, right? The whip creates motion.
Energy.
A vibration of the whip creates just raw material, raw energy, motion of the hind legs.
It's like adding clay to your potting wheel. You're adding, have more to work with.
Yeah, the spur is a good aid to ask a hind leg to yield and sidestep. It's a good aid. If you give a short, quick aid close to the girth, it makes the hind leg lift.
To pick up the hind leg very quickly.
And it can be a good bending aid. Like the spur and the rein on the same side, they always have to work together. Spanish Riding School actually had a book manuscript all about the spur. And then disappeared, apparently. But Klaus Krisch told me that they had an entire book just on the use of the spur. Just imagine, so there's more to it than most people realize, right? So, amazing. And Tommy Cook actually told us too that you touch the horse with a spur and then you start pressing. And as you're pressing with it, you're flexing with the rein. You should have the same amount of pressure on the spur as on the rein. And the horse should release into the spur and into the rein. So basically bend, relax, and then you take the pressure off. So spur and rein work together when you're trying to improve the bend. The spur can create, of course, more sidestepping. So but it's also this touch and press and then release, And even the sidestepping aid of the spur can be supported by a rein aid, right? The rein aid is that indirect rein of opposition, I think that the French call it, where you're using the lateral leverage of the neck, like move the horse's head and neck to the left. That helps you move the croup to the right. So if your left leg and left rein cooperate that way, you can use the neck and rein of the horse to push the croup to the right, by flexing left a little bit. So yeah, spur and whip have very different functions in a sense. Spur is more of a suppling aid in a way, whereas the whip creates more movement, more energy. So as a rule of thumb.
There were lots of nice comments on Facebook, but there were no questions, so I'm not going to read them right now because we're running at an hour and a half already.
I know. We need to
So
wrap it up. Sandra says, thank you very much. Your response was extremely helpful and identified where I'm going wrong. That's
great.
awesome.
Good. I'm glad we can help.
Carolyn Dar says, no books and the knowledge is gone. I
That's it.
agree. I mean, I'm an academic, so I like books, right? But a lot of the traditional writing masters, they're not so thrilled with books, which is sad, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, Terry says, yes, I actually trained with Dawn, one of Carl's certified students, but had many hours working with Carl too, was just not in position to get up to your place for Carl's clinics.
Oh.
Yeah, he was in Portland a lot in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And he was in California a lot too.
Yeah.
Carolyn Dar says, like you said one time when you were talking about the Spanish writing school, all the knowledge dies with them leaving. Too bad. They really need to write their knowledge down. Yeah, I agree that they should,
I mean, there's a couple of writers left that have a good deal of knowledge, and I hope we do report it.
Yeah, the sad thing is that the best writers are often so intuitive and all feel that they don't even know how to describe what they're doing. So they're usually a little bit against it. They don't want to deal with it. The people who are the really good teachers and explainers and analysts, they're often not the most talented writers. They had to work really hard at analyzing, understanding, teaching themselves how to feel, how to do things, So, that's unfortunately the way it is, right? The best authors are not necessarily the best writers and trainers. And the best writers and trainers are often not very good teachers because they have so much feel and so much intuition. They just do it because they know this is what the horse needs. The body feels it, the body does it. It doesn't even pass through the brain. It's just like from the butt to the spine and back to the horse, right? And so that makes it, they can be brilliant and inspirational writers, but they often really have no idea what they're doing, how they're doing it, and they have no idea how to pass it on. And you hear that of like Alexis Lot, the famous French general, écuyer en chef of Saumur. He would write little circles around the students and say, do what I'm doing. It's like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do what I'm doing, basically? And Oskar Stenzbeck in Germany was like that. He's one of the most brilliant trainers of the early 20th century. He was like, same thing. He just didn't explain anything. It's like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you figure it out? And the people who were the famous book authors who could really put things into writing, they were often not nearly as good in the saddle as the people who didn't write books. Sad, but unfortunately, that's sort of the way it is.
Yeah. We have a question from Rebecca Zeitlin on YouTube. Can that lifting movement be achieved in horses that carry significant tension, particularly in their neck? Or does the stretch and willingness to extend there come first?
You have to balance and supple the horse. Really, put the feet on the line, try to find the tension, eliminate the tension, and then they can move more freely, and then you can increase the movement.
Yeah, I would say your first item on the agenda is to remove the tension, to find all the blockages and do the gymnastic work you need to do to eliminate the blockages, eliminate the tension, so that the energy can travel through, and then you have the power and ability. Otherwise, you're going to create other tension and patterns in the horse, and they'll block you, and it just
as a very simple rule of thumb. Pick a line of travel. Could be anything. Circle, square, rectangle, triangle, doesn't matter. Pick a line, put the horse's feet on it. Left feet on the left side of the line, right feet on the right side of the line. Find a tempo that's not too fast and not too slow, where the horse can find this balance. Find an energy level that's not too high and not too low. If the energy level is too low, it's like trying to cook something at 50 degrees Celsius and nothing happens. Too much energy is like 300 degrees Celsius and everything burns, and then you don't get a good meal. So
good analogy.
No, I'm such a cook.
I know you burnt the soup the other night.
There you go.
It said, we can't burn soup. I told Kat this morning and she laughed.
I'm a good eater. I'm not a good cook.
Our housekeeper, Kat. I told her, and she was like, "Of course you can burn soup."
Anyway, we digress again. But choose a pattern. Put the feet on the pattern. Find the right tempo. Find the right stride length. Find the right energy level. That will help the horse balance and relax, and it goes a long way towards straightening. And then there will probably still be some muscle blockages left. And then you go hunt for them by doing exercises like turn the shoulder, move the hips, change the bend. And then you gradually find where the horse is holding tension. Then you release that with exercises. And then once you have that, you have the horse going soft, round, nice, pleasant. Then you can try to ramp up the energy a little bit. Now give me a little bit more power, and give me a little bit more power, and give me a little bit more. There's no point in powering up before the horse is balanced and soft and relaxed, because it just amplifies the tension. And
it's like if you don't make sure all the tires are filled properly on your car, if you have one that's slightly flat, if you increase the speed, that's going to increase the imbalance, and you're going to create bigger problems. And same thing, sort of. Car is not the same as a horse, but Denicia.
This is the same with people who are hypermobile and those who are not. The non-hypermobile people don't seem to grasp that stabilizing your core as a hypermobile person is really difficult. I'm on the stiff side. Shana's on the hypermobile side. But actually, I realized that if I'm stiff somewhere, it's because I'm not engaged enough somewhere else. And in order for me to release my hips and become more mobile, I have to find another place to stabilize myself.
The hypermobility is coming because something else is not allowing the movement to come through. Oftentimes, so it comes out in the places where you're hypermobile.
And it's a good point here.
It is.
So Denicia says it's not just a matter of you're sitting crooked exactly. Well, how exactly am I sitting crooked? Tell me exactly what to change, because I have no idea. You're right. There's so many movement possibilities in a hypermobile person that someone who's not hypermobile does not realize. When Shana and I first met, Shana did this funny belly dance on the horse, and I was totally stumped. I have no idea, why is she doing that? Where is that coming from? She's like the lumbar spine was just bouncing back and forth wildly, forward and back, wiggling.
I was taught this. I was taught that that's how you move.
And I was standing there and sitting. I have no idea why she's doing that.
No, I have
because I'm more stiff, naturally. It's like I don't know how we resolved it. Shana overcame it, but I really, it's like I have no idea.
Form follows function. That's how we did it. That's how we did it. I just had to, in order to be effective with my horses, I had to learn how to, quiet that down.
Yeah. But yeah, but that
But-
was like the first time where I realized I cannot relate to this.
Mhm.
That's a completely different body than mine. I have no idea how this works. I have no idea why she's doing what she's doing. And that's why I have no idea how to fix it, right?
But it would have been so much easier back then if we had known about the Feldenkrais stuff that we know about now, because this changes your whole ability, your body awareness. You find the fine nuances, which you really need when you're hypermobile, because everything is possible, right? And you need to figure out how to become aware of all the different parts, because we have these big black holes. Like I can feel here and I can feel down here, but everything between, not at all. That's how I used to be. And now I can feel every vertebra and I can control every vertebra. And that has changed because of the Feldenkrais work that we do
I mean, there's
in
a
all
lot
of our courses.
more knowledge and a lot more
Yeah.
tools out there than 20, 30, 40 years ago. You know, back then it was pretty rudimentary in a way. You were really left to your own devices. You know?
Okay, Terry Douglas says exactly. The writers that feel aren't always good at putting into words. Very glad Thomas has written his books, need to republish them. You know what? He needs to rewrite them because he has so much more to add to them.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, you know, for a number of years, when I looked at my book, I was still happy with it. And now it's like,
Especially your first one.
it's dated a little bit. Now I
Yeah.
would explain things differently and
Yeah.
I would put things differently. So I might have to
There'll be
do
more
a
books.
new edition or
We
you know,
just-
like a new book that's a little different.
And there will, a reedition of the original first one, and then some other books too. There's some that are kind of brewing.
Yeah, I've learned more stuff.
Brewing in his head. We talk
Yeah.
about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So eventually,
Yeah. I mean, luckily, I didn't stay at the level of 2010. I've learned more things and thought more, you know,
It's
about
developed.
it. And,
And when you do a lot of
Mhm.
teaching, you get better and better at explaining things. And
yeah.
so your own writing develops it, but also
Mhm.
teaching develops it, your understanding.
Jerry says Carl did his letters, amazing info, but typical of Carl at times cryptic. That's true.
Yeah.
Don is still figuring out many of the tidbits Carl dropped for him to figure out. Some seem pretty odd, but amazing discoveries.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, sometimes these teachers tell you some weird stuff out of context that makes no sense, and then it takes you a few years, and eventually you figure out what they meant. Yeah, happens. So I'm familiar with the situation.
Yes.
Or the teacher will tell you something, and at the time you intellectually you think you understand. It's like, oh yeah, of course. And one of my old teachers told me, why don't you use your knees more? He was like, he was like, 6'4", and I'm 6'2", right? And I said, oh yeah, of course, knees, got it. Makes sense, totally. And then like 3 years later, it dawned on me, it's like, oh, that's what he meant. Oh, okay. So I had that a lot. That there was this little lag time between the teacher telling me something and me finally figuring it out. What
This
they
happens,
actually
like, go back and read, like Steinbrig's book or something, you're like, that's what he meant. I thought I understood that 20 years ago. Now I understand it. There's a spiral nature to the learning, just like the training scale is spiral in nature. We were talking about this a couple days ago. The learning is also spiral. You revisit the topics over and over and again, and you revisit them in the training of the horse, but you revisit in your learning too, and it continues to.
Oh yeah, you go through the same topics, but at a higher level. It's like a spiral staircase, So you come around the same view. You deal with the same topics. You deal with the same issues. They never really go away, but you see more detail. You see, I don't know. Maybe your standards increase so that you feel like sometimes it can feel like you're never getting any better, because as you learn more, your perception increases, your horizon broadens, and it's like, oh my God, there are all these other things that I had no idea.
You see in finer detail, so you see more possibilities.
So, So
it's never-ending journey.
I know.
This dressage thing.
It's
great.
true. We need to be ready to understand it, and it gets deeper as we grow.
Yeah.
I guess it's good news and bad news. I mean, good news is it'll never be boring because we'll never actually get there. Bad news is like it's frustrating sometimes because you feel like, man, I've been doing this for so long and I still feel like a beginner. So, yeah, but that's the way it goes. So Leslie, Beatrice Palmer says, thank you so much for the insights today. I found your straightening training course so valuable to understand the understanding of the concepts. A little more to my question of the day about the saddle slipping left for building up the back of the horse and throughness and building the strength and muscle, evenness and straightness. Do I sit anatomically to the middle of the saddle when it slipped to the left? Do I ignore the saddle and stay straight to the horse? That is a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
What can sometimes work, like if the horse is like this, right? If you sit like this with your pelvis, you may actually prevent that side of the pelvis to come up. So
and you'll continue to pull the saddle further over.
So you may make things worse, but what you could try is the horse's pelvis is this incline, but maybe with your pelvis you sit like this.
And you keep bringing that hind leg on the lower side under.
So there is a gap between your seat bone and the horse's pelvis and the horse's hind leg. But then your leg can drive that hind leg
to try to fill that space.
So as the hind leg steps under, the hip comes up and then it fills the space and then it's level and then you can sit on it. It's like, some farriers, when the horse's feet are funky, they put shoes on that are a little oversized. And the theory is that if you make the shoe bigger than the foot will grow and fill that space. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's the theory. And that's how I think of the seat. Sometimes I make a space and I want the horse to fill that space.
Yeah.
And that actually works,
She also says, but when it's slipped to the left, then I would fix it and try to get it back in the center.
Yeah,
you might have to do it over and over and over and over and over for a while.
Yeah.
You can even get to where you can basically do it without stopping. You can do it as you're riding.
Yeah, if the saddle gets pulled off to one side, you may have to stop and get it back into the middle. But still, you can try to keep your pelvis with one seat bone floating a little over the saddle, and then use your leg to fill the space until that seat bone, until the hip of the horse.
But that's
comes
if
up.
the saddle's already centered, just the horses.
Yeah, but if the saddle is off center, you might have to stop, get off, recenter, tighten the girth, get back on.
You might have to stop, and you can do it at the halt, pulling the saddle over. And you can also get to where you can do it in motion. It's common when horses are stiff in the canter, for example, that the saddle will slide and you can fix it in the canter. You get to where you can sit on the inside seat bone and the inside stirrup and pull the saddle back in the center again. And then the horse as the horse flexes the hind legs more, gets straighter. This doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, if the saddle really slides off, it's usually a more extreme case of crookedness. It goes away, it gets better.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to get the saddle back into the middle.
Okay. She also says, really liked your suggestion regarding the stirrup stepping for the hollow side exercise to help educate, but until the suppleness strength pattern of movement is functional, what is your suggestion how to position on the saddle or not? I try to ride, not sit, but you know what I mean.
That's probably what we're just talking about.
Yeah,
I think.
And the horse does not have a wither. He is round. When I train, he gets rounder. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of, that when the saddle slips, it's usually the horses with low withers and very round rib cages.
The Lipizans we used to ride were sometimes like this, and it's a little bit of a conformational fault in the breed in some Lipizans that they have no withers. Or, they have withers, obviously, but their barrel was so round that the saddle just slides. That's why Spanish riding school, they have the croupers and the breastplates.
Yeah, in the Baroque era and Renaissance, all the horses had a crouper and a breastplate as a standard issue because they were often very.
It was functional. It wasn't just decoration.
Mutton withered and very round in the rib cage. Of course, these horses were also ridden outdoors, right? If you go uphill, downhill, and the horse doesn't have any withers, then uphill the saddle slides towards the croup, downhill the saddle slides onto the neck. So you kind of need the breastplate and the crouper to keep the saddle in the middle somewhere, and also keep it from tilting to one side or the other. Modern horses usually have a little bit more withers, so you don't need it as much. But with some horses, it probably still makes sense. If you have one that has no withers, and I've ridden Lipizans that had like no withers at all. They were completely like a vaulting barrel, So, and then you capsize really easily,
Mhm.
you know.
Okay, I think we are about done. We have some comments that people made on YouTube and Facebook and on here, but I think we've said the important things because it's we're almost at 2 hours.
I know, it's
So
amazing.
I'd like to wrap it up. I want to remind you all that we have a course currently open, starting effectively, officially starting tomorrow, but it's a beta course, so which means we produce the content as we go. So you actually have a few more days than that to get in, but if you want to be in on the welcome and orientation session tomorrow, which will be like this, or I'm sorry, it's not tomorrow, it's Friday. I'm sorry, I'm 1 day ahead. 2 days. It doesn't start tomorrow. 2 days. So sorry. If you want to be in on that session though on Friday, then you need to sign up for the course. I posted a link. I can post it again here. In can you just paste that command?
It doesn't.
Paste. No.
I did, but it's
Yeah. You were doing shift or something.
Yeah, control.
Control.
So
That's
it looks
command.
different here.
Okay, so that is the link. Go check it out. We have some bonuses in there. We're going to be doing all sorts of really cool stuff with demos that we're doing and whatever you guys need in the course, we will do. So go check it out. We would love to continue these conversations with you inside the course because we will do this today and we'll do this one more tomorrow. And then we shift all of our focus and we're doing it in the course.
Yeah, we'll explore all these topics and more in the course in detail, and lots of exercises. You get lots of exercises where you can explore the theory and test the theory.
Writing exercises and stirrup stepping exercises.
And Feldenkrais.
And Feldenkrais lessons. And there will be audio lessons that you can play while you are writing. So you listen and it guides you not through an actual exercise necessarily, but you ride an exercise or whatever you were going to ride. And we guide you through what you need to look for, reminding you of the concepts we explored in that module and so on. So you integrate it into your writing, and so that you, a lot of people find that they read the theory and then they go out there and ride their horse and they forget all of it. It's like not, it hasn't really sunk in, and this way you can revisit the content while you're on the horse. You get reminded of these things and get to think about these things. Oh yeah, I need to think about, you know, feeling this for this, and how is, we ask questions, you know, how is this, what do you feel here, so that you get prompted to start to notice these parts of your horse, these parts of the horse's movement, to look at what's going on, and you integrate it into your writing. So that's one of the things. We'll have imagery lessons, which are like an image. What did I come up with yesterday? Like riding a boat or a horse on a boat in the wind or something. I came up with something ridiculous, but like the one we came up with today, riding the swell of a wave. That the horse, the energy of the horse is like a swell of the wave, and it builds. And it builds bigger. It starts small and it builds bigger, and you're riding that swell. Those sorts of images, lessons like that, built around an image that you can incorporate, all sorts of fun stuff like that. And we'd love to have you in the course. So anyway, I'm not going to go on and on. There's Q&As, we give feedback, all of that. Just check out the link, and the info is all in there. If you have any questions, just ask us.
Yeah, exactly.
And we will see you tomorrow. We will be here again to talk about, what are we talking about tomorrow?
I can't remember the topics for tomorrow.
Oh, it's through the back, only about the back. I'm sure by now, if you listened today, you know that there's more to it. You have already a clue of the answer, but you never know where these discussions are going to go, because sometimes we go off on an interesting side tangent that reveals all sorts of hidden little nooks and crannies. Yeah. A treasure trove of new stuff. So we will explore whatever comes up tomorrow. Yeah.
Experts on the tangent. We always go off on tangents. That's our forte. So, yeah. But they're always interesting.
At least for us.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah.
So we'll see y'all tomorrow, or not. I hope so.